Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky country.
Madam Speaker, it's a pleasure to rise in the House this evening to speak, to participate in the debate on motion M86, which would create a Citizens' Assembly on electoral reform. I'm one of the 20 members that has seconded this motion, and I would note that members of all parties, with the exception of the Bloc, have seconded this motion, or members of all parties. And I want to commend the member for both Nanaimo Ladysmith for putting this forward, as well as the member for Kitchener Centre, who had put forward a motion that was near identical to this previously. And Madam Speaker, in fact, more than 3/4 of Canadians support having a Citizens' Assembly on electoral reform. And importantly, as part of this, 69% of the voters of every single party, of any party in Canada, support this type of a measure. So, Madam Speaker, what is a Citizens' Assembly? A Citizens' Assembly is a nonpartisan, independent, and trusted group of citizens that is selected at random. It's a group of Canadians who are broadly representative of the diversity of the population, who are given the opportunity to learn from experts on a particular topic, thoughtfully consider the options, and issue and make recommendations based on their work. This motion would task creating a Citizens' Assembly to review our electoral system, to investigate how it could be improved, if it could be improved at all, and then to make recommendations based on their work. And, Madam Speaker, on an issue that is as fundamental as how we constitute who represents us and who gets to govern our country, it's essential that this process be free from politics and any partisan influence and interests, because political parties will be biased in any recommendation that they offer. Parties like the Conservatives, which have shown that they cannot work with other parties, will want to keep the first-past-the-post system so that they can shoot for a majority and impose their will, or minority will, on Canadians. Big tent parties like the Liberal Party would seek some sort of a ranked ballot so that parties that appeal broadly get rewarded. Single-issue parties like the Greens will want proportional representation so that a smaller vote share in many ridings across the country will lead to them having greater representation. And we know that the NDP is in favor of mixed-member proportionate, where you're able to leverage some of the single-issue, single-stakeholder matters, as well as taking advantage of some regional strengths. And of course, the Bloc would likely prefer to keep the system as it is right now, as they do have a much greater representation than their vote share at this point. But quite frankly, Madam Speaker, that's why none of us here are trustworthy on this matter. We would all be blindly self-interested in choosing a system that would work best for our given party. But, Madam Speaker, even after a system is chosen by a Citizens' Assembly, it's absolutely critical that the public have the opportunity to vote for or against it in a referendum. Just as democracies have the right to vote for who represents us, we especially should have the right to vote for or against any system that would completely change this process. Otherwise, the system will not be seen to have any legitimacy. And I therefore suggest that be included in this motion, or perhaps that can be included if this motion gets debated at committee. Like the member that proposed this motion, I am a British Columbia who has experienced what a Citizens' Assembly can look like. The province launched a Citizens' Assembly in the wake of, or in response to, a provincial NDP victory in the 1996 election, where the NDP formed government but only had a minority of the vote, less than 40% of the vote. In the subsequent election, the BC Liberals ended up winning a huge majority, but to their credit, they proceeded with moving forward on a Citizens' Assembly for electoral reform in 2004, despite having gotten that huge majority based on the first-past-the-post system. I think there's much that we could learn from this process. But unfortunately, there was a Citizens' Assembly on electoral reform which chose a system, but when they put it to a referendum, they chose a threshold of 60% to reach before any change can be made. And in this referendum, 57% ended up voting in favor of choosing single transferable vote as the new system for British Columbia, which is a very significant, given that this is not a system that many Canadians or many British Columbians knew at that time. Madam Speaker, we see similar examples at the federal level in Canada where majority governments are delivered with about 40% of the vote. And this is especially the case when we see poor voter turnout. This leaves much of the country feeling disenfranchised, and it's contributed to dramatic policy shifts that we see in our country, which causes vast uncertainty, and which impedes making progress on some critical things, like on climate change, but it also it brings in some political risk that actually impedes business investment. Madam Speaker, I think we can do better than this with our democracy. In fact, we must do everything we can to revitalize democracy in this country, as we see it's under threat from foreign interference, from disinformation, both foreign and domestic, and also from the tactics of the Conservatives that are seeking to make democracy look so ugly that people lose confidence, stay home, and don't vote. Madam Speaker, I want to recognize the work of so many advocates on this matter. In fact, I hear from my constituents frequently about electoral reform. As my constituent Eric tells me, the current voting system is, quote, pushing people away from participating in elections. It's very unhealthy for our democracy, and I dare say even dangerous in this day and age of disinformation. Theodora says, we need this advance so that all people and their ideas are well included and given respect for their ideas and new beneficial approaches. That's why, Madam Speaker, like many Canadians, including so many that I've met in my riding, were swayed by the promise made in 2015 that it would be the last election held under the first-past-the-post system. And in fact, I participated in a consultation that was coordinated by the current Minister of Health, who at the time was the Parliamentary Secretary for Democratic Reform. And I remember the consultation being robust and definitely touched on the different positives and negatives of different political systems, and I thought it was very well done. But while the government of the day made some very important advances in improving our democracy, particularly with delivering an independent Senate, I was disappointed that the decision to pursue electoral reform was not followed through because there was not consensus at the time. But, Madam Speaker, I do believe that that the system was in fact doomed to failure from the beginning. And frankly, we should be grateful that the decision to move ahead with a system like ranked ballot wasn't chosen by the government and instituted before the next election, because it would not allow for an unbiased decision, and it wouldn't have given the choice for people to choose one political system or another for elections. So I believe that campaign promise was actually the wrong one. But it's not just me, Madam Speaker. The Prime Minister, in a question and answer period in my riding earlier this year, said that not acting on electoral reform was one of the things that he regretted most. So, Madam Speaker, this represents an opportunity to change that. My hope is that this motion will pass, and that we will be able to, or that a Citizens' Assembly would be able to be launched as soon as possible, but frankly, it would not likely be able to be launched before the spring of next year. But I would like to see a Citizens' Assembly be formed and for it to have a mandate to undertake a study and deliver it by early 2025. Assuming that there is an election in September of 2025, it would be possible to align the election vote with a referendum vote on any change that is recommended by such a body to change the electoral system. That way, the 2025 electoral vote, parties would have the opportunity to decide whether or not they would commit to change the electoral system for the following election. And, Madam Speaker, I believe that setting it up in this timeline would now allow for enough time for Canadians to learn about the changes that are proposed, but the government should also provide resources for third parties to educate Canadians about the chosen system so that they're properly informed. And importantly, I believe that a referendum on any change that is proposed be set at a threshold of 50% plus one vote. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Resuming debate, the honour member for Lanark